In answer to your burning question, yes, he runs. A lot. Oh my gosh, this thing. I can't help it every time I see him run. That's what I think about, this sort of long-standing joke about him running in every movie. He runs a crap ton. In Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. Excuse me, my dog decides she's had enough of my lap. Okay, so yes, last night I caught an early screening of Mission Impossible. It was surprisingly on IMAX. I was not expecting that, so that was pretty cool. Very big theater, pretty much packed except the front 2 rows. Nobody wanted to sit in those seats. Fortunately, this means I don't have to do a double feature today. Just gonna watch Lilo and Stitch. Okay. Mission Impossible Final Reckoning. The part 1 of this movie was Dead Reckoning. They changed the title up. This is not called a part 2, it's just called The Final Reckoning, but it is very clearly a part 2 to Dead Reckoning. It picks up not long after the events of the previous movie. So we've got Ethan is on the run, and the entity is taking control of all these different things in the cyber sphere and taking control of, well, you know, it's basically a Terminator scenario. It's taking control of missile systems. So there's this race against time to fix the situation. This film is 3 hours long, right at about 3 hours long. Okay, maybe a couple minutes less than that, but still, it's a long ass movie, y'all. I will say I was not bored, but I was aware of how long the movie was. I know that feels like a bit of a contradiction. It's not really. I mean, you just know it's a long story. But was I waiting for it to hurry up and be over? No. The film did keep my attention pretty much from start to finish. There were some things that I liked about this a little bit more than the previous entry. I remember in the previous entry, I could not stand the character played by Hayley Atwell. I mean, I was actively wishing for her demise because she was super annoying. She was very poorly written. There was no clear reason why her character remained around for as long as she did. As the story went on, it became clear she was going to be like the replacement sort of partner to Ethan, and I couldn't stand that because I didn't like her. I liked her a little bit more in this one, but I still am annoyed by everything that happened in the previous movie, so whatever. She wasn't as aggravating. In this movie, Ethan is kind of assembling sort of a new team-ish, and for various reasons, which you find out. The character played by Pom Klementieff, if that's how you pronounce her last name, she's back. She somehow survived what looked like fatal wounds. Okay, there's no clear explanation as to how she survived. She just somehow managed to survive. All right. So she's back in the picture again. Esai Morales is back in the picture. Obviously, he never really left. He is, not counting the entity, he is the big bad, kind of in control of a lot of these things that are happening. He's got plans about what he wants to do about the entity. It conflicts with what Ethan and pretty much the rest of the world want to do about the entity. So there's just all of these different scenarios that are running in conflict with each other. And there is one mission after the next that they need to do in order to get to, obviously, the climax of the movie. There were also some touching moments spread throughout here and there between Ethan and some members of his team. It felt like a poignant send-off to the characters in general. And this is called The Final Reckoning, so is it final? I don't know. I kind of had the feeling that Tom Cruise was going to play this character until he was in his 90s, but who knows? Maybe not. So one thing that aggravated me about Dead Reckoning, not counting Hayley Atwell's character, was the fact that that movie, probably more than any other, not counting the second movie, we just pretend that doesn't exist, or I do anyway. Hated that movie. Not counting movie 2, Dead Reckoning, while it was enjoyable, it started to really stretch the limits of my ability to suspend disbelief, probably more than any of the other films did before that one. I know that might feel a little odd to hear me say that, just given the whole Mission Impossible thing, what it's all about and everything that happens in the movies. But the previous movies before Dead Reckoning, yes, while it did kind of test those limits, it didn't push beyond them to the point that I was just like, I I can't. I can't with this. Dead Reckoning veered very heavily into that territory, and that's why it was kind of a disappointment. I will say about Final Reckoning, yes, the same thing goes on. The ability of Ethan and his team to manage to do things perfectly when they matter the most, and there's nothing that goes wrong, nothing that really, I mean, obviously there's all these stumbling blocks that get thrown in the way, but just miraculously, they're always able to overcome these odds and survive despite that little pesky thing called reality telling you that there's no freaking way somebody could survive some of the stuff that they do. So that does hold this film back a bit for me. The plot also feels like, as with what was going on in Dead Reckoning, the plot for this movie also feels like it is just, it's that sequel thing. It's just that we got to go bigger, we got to go louder, we have to do more. It has to be more and more intense and more extreme and more intricate and more this and more that. After a while, it just feels a bit exhausting and it starts to feel a little pretentious when you veer into that territory, which Final Reckoning absolutely does. Granted, the storyline does proceed in a logical manner based on the events that have to happen to lead to a particular point, but it just feels like there was just so much going on. And I don't want to say it made me angry because it didn't, but I was sitting there with a definite feeling that, yeah, I see what you're doing, and you're thinking this is making it something so much more spectacular, but to me, it's just making it a bit more cumbersome with all this plot that's going on. It's odd to say that after having just said that I wasn't bored, because I wasn't. I don't know. It's weird. It's a mixed bag for me. Also, because of some of these things I mentioned, this film had a lot of predictable moments. I knew that despite whatever terrible situation was going on, I could predict how it was going to end up. I might not be able to predict all the steps that were going to get you there, but I knew pretty much what was going to happen. So there wasn't much in here that was a huge surprise, and that was a little frustrating. I don't know, maybe that's kind of been a thing that's existed in the previous movies, but it felt like they were able to carry it off a little bit better. This movie is kind of weighted down by its own desire to give audiences something huge, and it does give you something huge. One thing that became very clear to me, well, it just underscored what I already knew, is that Tom Cruise adores his job, and he adores his fans, and he loves to make films that cater to audience enjoyment. His passion for what he does shines through clearly in Final Reckoning, and that is something that I can appreciate despite the issues that I've already brought up. The audience I was with seemed to really enjoy the experience. There were several moments of laughter, exclamations of sadness and dismay at certain events, even though I felt like they were pretty predictable, but whatever. And there was applause at the end. So the group that I was with seemed very content with their viewing experience. I am not sure how well this film is going to perform this weekend, especially when held up beside Lilo and Stitch, which is a family movie and about half as long. So, you're going to have families bringing their kids. I feel like Lilo and Stitch might take number one, honestly. Dead Reckoning underperformed when it came out a couple years ago. I don't know. I kind of have a feeling the same thing might happen with Reckoning. Maybe not. Maybe I will be wrong. We'll know in a few days. I certainly feel like this film is worth the big screen experience. I also feel like it's worth it if you love the Mission Impossible franchise, if you like Tom Cruise, if you like crazy over-the-top action. This might just scratch that itch very well for you. I do love action movies, and despite all of the sort of cons that I have already mentioned, the film still had plenty of fun and gripping moments, despite the obvious emotional manipulation in some scenes. I can't say that I walked away from it angry. I can't say I walked away from it disappointed. I went in with the expectation that I would have a very similar experience or a very similar feeling about it as I did with Dead Reckoning, and I sort of did-ish. The cons that I had for this entry were more stacked up under the column of too too much suspension of disbelief. Whereas in the previous movie, there was part of that, but then there was also Hayley Atwell can't stand her character. She was more tolerable in this one, but boy, that suspension of disbelief required when you're watching this, it's just like, I don't know about that. Having said that, the stunts in here, the set pieces in here, the cinematography, there is a scene that happens in a sunken submarine. You guys, the way that thing was filmed, I knew how things were going to end up at the end of the scene, but the way they put that thing together was very, very effective. And I really liked how that was shot. It was beautiful in some parts, and then at the same time, very, very tenseful, as my daughter says, tenseful. Even though I knew what was going to happen at the end still. It does do a good job at making you feel on the edge of your seat, even though you can pretty accurately predict what the outcome is going to be. So I don't know. It's kind of a mixed bag, but I would say that the bag weighs a little bit more heavily in favor of watching the film, in favor of enjoyment, even though there's this other side that kind of weighs it down a little bit. The character played by Esai Morales, one thing that I was feeling more and more about him as this movie went on was that he was coming across as a very mustache twirly character, not a very nuanced antagonist. Maybe he's not supposed to be. I mean, I don't feel like Philip Seymour Hoffman came across as a nuanced antagonist, but he was very effectively formidable, and his performance was a standout for me. Of all of the Mission Impossible movies, he stands out to me above and beyond all the others. Esai Morales, his character, the way they wrote him sort of attempts to kind of come close to the serious threat that he poses to Ethan and his team. But in the end, he just kind of feels a bit more like a Dr. Robotnik, you know, sort of he's everywhere and he can do everything. And he just, I don't know. It didn't work so well for me, but the enjoyment factor of the other things I mentioned was enough to kind of help balance the scales or tilt the scales a little bit more in favor of the positives for this film. So I'd be really curious to hear what you guys think whenever you get around to watching it and how you think it measures up. I certainly don't love all of these films equally. My favorite is the third movie. If you go into this just loving to watch crazy over-the-top action and intense moments and knowing that Tom Cruise is doing his own stunts, that really amps up the tension when you're watching this. I mean, you know he's fine. He lived through it. The film does do a decent enough job at kind of, you know, amping up that tension, but in the end, it does ask a little bit too much of me when it comes to being able to buy into the realistic nature of some of the stuff that happens. But it was still an enjoyable viewing experience, and I do recommend it for fans of the series, especially for fans of action. Mission Impossible probably has some of the best action scenes in action movies that I've seen throughout the course of all the years I've been watching action movies. So, you know, that's a plus. Okay, at this point, I don't really have much else to say about Mission Impossible: The Final Reckoning. Let me know what you guys think about it after you watch it, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye.